Welcome to Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. In a world where talking about the impact of money is difficult, we share stories and tips for reducing the negative impact that significant wealth can have on our emotions, relationships, and behaviors. Now here's your host, Ginny Galisanow.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us John A. Warnick. John A. is the founder of the Purposeful Planning Institute, which is a learning center for professionals interested in mastering the purposeful planning process of creating purposeful trust. Welcome, John A. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a real honor to join you.
Thank you. I would say, John A., that purposeful trust are your trademark, and for that matter, your legacy. Would you share with our listeners your story of what led you to the idea of creating purposeful trust, and how are they different from traditional trust?
The story, Jenny, really starts 18 plus years ago. It was a Tuesday morning after a 4-day weekend, federal holiday, and a trust beneficiary called, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Blippity blip, I want you to fire that blippity blip trustee." And I said, "Miranda, I can tell something terribly wrong has happened with your trust." And she said, "Yes, it's my blippity blip check." And she told me she had just gone to the mailbox, and her trust check, which she'd only turned 21 8 or 9 months earlier, had been receiving these monthly distributions since her 21st birthday, and it wasn't there. And I asked her, "When does it normally come?" And she said, "On the 1st or 2nd of each month." And I said, "Well, today's the 4th. The 1st was Saturday. If you normally get the check on the 2nd or 3rd, that means the bank mails it on the 1st. And because the 1st was a Saturday, yesterday was a federal holiday, they're putting that check in the mail today. You'll have it tomorrow or Thursday." And of course, I thought this was brilliant analysis, and I had solved her problem. And she surprised me when she said so powerfully, "That's not my blippity blip problem, that's their problem." And it was in that moment, after I got off the phone with her, that I began to just have these thoughts spinning in my head. What went wrong here? This trust was established by her grandfather to give her, in a sense, a hand up, a leg up in life, to help her get educated, to get started. There were provisions to assist her with purchasing a home, starting a business. And instead, she had dropped out of college, and she had become so dependent on this trust that when the check was a day or two later than normal, she was completely unwound and completely Twitter-pated. And as I thought about that and how far this was from the intention her grandparents had had in creating these trusts for their grandchildren, a question formed in my mind, and it was, there must be a better way. What is that better way? And that, Jenny, really is what led over the next roughly couple of years to a remarkable series of events in which sometimes it was extremely wise advisors, consultants, and in some cases it was the trust creators themselves that began to show up in my professional path and began to help me realize that the traditional structures that we erect in the estate planning, wealth transfer planning worlds, in even business succession regimes, that those structures can be antithetical to the flourishing and the well-being of the very individuals that the trust creators want to benefit. And as that realization hit me, I continued to scratch and look for, okay, how can we transform these trusts out of the traditional complexity, sterility, and create something that beneficiaries will understand the purpose of the gift, will feel positive emotional energy flowing from the intention of the trust creator? And how can we give them not just protection and restrict their access, but how can we give them guidance and what I call guidelights? How can the trust creator speak to the trustees in a very meaningful way to guide them in obtaining the most important purposes and goals, objectives that the trust creator had? So that it's as that intention formed that over a couple of years, these what we call 7 keys of purposeful trusts and gifts emerged. And since then, I've had clients frequently show up to where today 80% of the trusts that I help clients create are what we call purposeful.
I love it. So, would you mind sharing with us what those keys are?
You're going to test my memory now, aren't you?
Oh, I am. Maybe I can help
Okay.
you.
Well, the first key to me is that a purposeful trust, a purposeful gift it captures the voice of the trust creator. So instead of the typical third person legalese, purposeful trusts are drafted in the first person and contain a lot of expressions of the actual intent and the words of the trust creator. And the way that that happens is usually through text boxes that
Mhm.
are inserted at strategic places throughout the trust where something meaningful that the trust creator has to say is captured. So the first key is the key of capturing the voice of the trust creator. The second key is the key of simplicity and clarity. The complexity of the trust can be overwhelming, overdaunting to beneficiaries, even confusing to lay trustees. And so oftentimes, if it's important to a trust creator to create a trust that is clear and understandable, we will create text boxes that will be overviews, explanations, examples that help make clearer what the boilerplate legalese, which is so heavy and dense, is doing or saying. The third key is the power of name. Um, I discovered early on that there was a tremendous symbolic opportunity overlooked that trust creators were failing to take advantage of, and that is the naming of their trust. How many parents would allow the doctor or the nurse to name their child, and yet nobody thinks twice about the fact that trusts are named by the paralegal or the lawyer who's drafting them. And most of the names given to these trusts have little to do with the family other than they contain the family's name. So usually there's a tax acronym coupled with it. So the James Johnson Qualified Remainder Trust or Charitable Remainder Trust or whatever this tax function, we give it a tax name coupled with a family name. But that overlooks the opportunity to give the trust a meaningful name that connects to the most heartfelt purposes that the trust creator has. So an
I would,
example,
yeah, I would imagine by giving it a name, all of a sudden this trust becomes a gift.
it moves from being a transfer to a gift through that intention. You're right. So an example of a name, I had a client name her trust the Red Corvette Opportunity Trust. And what that meant was she had a statement of meaning. So it isn't just giving it a name, but now you have a text box that provides the symbolic meaning behind the name. And she went on in about 2 or 3 paragraphs to explain that I had shared with her the story of the Red Corvette. How wise would it be for a parent on their 16th birthday to announce to their child, sweetheart, here's the keys to a brand new Red Corvette. It's out in the driveway. It's there for you to take, invite your friends to go along, get out on the interstate, and just see how fast that vet will go. No parent in their right mind would do that without preparing their child, making sure that they went through driver's education, making sure that they had the car inspected, and it was insured, and the child was licensed. All those things that should be part of an orderly, prudent way of introducing your child to the responsibilities of being a driver in society. Well, so she basically created a trustee beneficiary training program, kind of like driver's education. She wanted her children to be trained before they would be given the keys. And then she went on to say that once you've received the keys, because you've completed this training, you will have the opportunity to do anything to become all that you're capable of being. And she went on to provide 2 or 3 sentences of color around how important it was to her that they enjoyed the assets that she was setting aside for them, and that they would use them to become, to live significant lives and to become all they were capable of being. So that's the third key, the power of name. The fourth key is the heart of a purposeful trust. We call it the purpose and intent clause. So too often today, trusts, this is true 99% of the time, trusts are created without any deep expression, meaningful expression of what the most heartfelt purposes are. The other problem is that most clients just accept the 4 or 5 standard legal purposes for creating a trust: tax minimization or avoidance, asset protection, centralized efficient management of assets, superior investment returns. Whatever those legal purposes are, that's usually about all that you see in the trust. We've, in working with clients, myself and the other members of the Purposeful Planning Institute, we've discovered that there's over 30 other non-tax, non-technical reasons that people want to create legacy trusts. And so that this purpose clause, the fourth key, is bringing into the trust with greater clarity and specificity the expressions of what your most heartfelt purposes and intent are. The fifth key is the key of transforming cash gifts and bequests of tangible personal property into lasting legacies and priceless heirlooms. And this is, there's a special technique. We'll talk a little bit more perhaps in this call about it, of the way in which you can create a purposeful legacy around a bequest. And George Washington, did this in his will, handwritten, 6 months before he died. He gave a gift to his nephews of his swords. And he said this about that gift. He said, "I give to each of my nephews one of my swords, each to choose in the order in which he's named, and to hold that sword with the following solemn injunction, that he'll never raise it, except it be in the case of self-defense or in defense of our nation and her liberties. And in the latter event, that he would prefer falling with this sword in his hands to the relinquishment thereof." So in about 75 words, Washington electroplated those swords with purpose and meaning. And those swords, 4 of the 5 swords, stayed in the bloodline of the nephews of George Washington, who were his nearest blood kin, for 5, 6, 7 generations, until they made their way into the hands of the Martha Washington Foundation, where they're now housed at Mount Vernon. The 5th sword would have made it there had it not been for an untimely death of one of the grandchildren of a nephew, who died in an insolvent estate situation, and all of his property had to be sold, including the sword. Anyway, that's the key of transforming cash and tangible personal property into purposeful legacies. The 6th key is the key of guidance. So much can be done to provide meaningful guidance to trustees, to provide greater guidelights to beneficiaries around the formulas for successful life, or the sharing of life wisdom and values. And this is one of the most powerful ways in which a trust can become an illuminating influence in the life of beneficiaries. If it's a trust that's just going to kind of divide and dump and dissipate the assets, it doesn't matter. But if it's a trust that's going to endure for perhaps generations or perpetually, as so often is the case with the big tax planned gifts that are done today, to be able to have this life wisdom shared so that it can continue to guide the current generation of beneficiaries and future descendants is so valuable. And the final key is the key of gratitude. What I discovered was, just like Miranda in that opening story I told, so many beneficiaries look at their trusts as obstacles between them and the capital inside the trust. How do I get my hands on it? I want it. And they're so self-focused, they become entitled, dependent, disengaged from life in many ways. They lose connection to the purpose and meaning of the gift. Gratitude is a wonderful antidote to that, what I call trust narcissism. And there are ways that we bring into the gift or the trust what we call seeds of gratitude, positive expressions of the emotional currency that makes up this gift. When you capture those so that the beneficiary is aware of that positivity in terms of why this gift was made or why this trust was created, it completely changes the way the beneficiary can look at and react to that capital. It allows them to be deeply appreciative for the gift and the opportunities that have been opened up through this planning. Instead of, it's very difficult usually to be grateful for just cash. It's the hardest thing to feel gratitude for, and particularly after you have it. But in the case of a purposeful trust or a purposeful gift, there is this kind of deliberate attempt to capture the positive emotional energy so that the beneficiaries can connect to it. And by connecting to that, being aware of that, it allows gratitude to have an influence in the life of the beneficiary. It's a huge antidote for entitlement and trust narcissism.
Now, gratitude, I think, is something that it's almost like a forgotten art sometimes. I know that with my clients, I often give them a gratitude journal and encourage them every evening or every morning to write just one or two things down for which they're grateful. And for me personally, one of the more surprising discoveries in terms of gratitude and gratitude journaling was to discover that on the days when I was not feeling particularly grateful about anything, those were the days when it flowed. I would have to sit there and struggle to think, okay, what am I grateful for today? And before you knew it, I had several pages of things for which I was grateful. That was a really big learning for me and something that I think some of my clients have discovered as well.
There is science that backs this up, Jenny. It isn't just you and I talking about something that feels good to you and to me, that we've actually experienced that flow of gratitude that you were just describing. But Dr. Robert Emmons, who really did the first research on gratitude and its physiological, psychological benefits, Dr. Emmons' research demonstrated that a gratitude practice as simple as just thinking once a week about 5 positive things that happened in my life in the last 7 days, that if you did that for 10 weeks, you would elevate your personal happiness and well-being by 25%.
Hmm.
That's a huge increase.
It's
Uh,
amazing.
and the other thing that he discovered was those who that focus on the hassles of life and the unfairness of life, that let bitterness get rooted in their heart and their mind, they experience a 15% decline or diminishment of their happiness and well-being. And the other thing that was amazing he discovered is the lasting power of a gratitude practice. So after 10 weeks of that exercise, his gratitude group, which was 300 students at UC Davis, 6 months later, after finishing the exercise, when they were retested, they still had a 15% elevated happiness and well-being. So they had come down a little bit, but they still were significantly higher than they were. He had never seen anything else in his professional career that came anywhere close to matching the power of gratitude to elevate one's personal sense of well-being and happiness.
You're listening to Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. For more information, visit our website, dynamicsofamilywealth.com. And now back to the show.
You know, not long ago, I was asked to speak at a seminar for the rising next generation. And at that seminar, I actually handed out gratitude journals to everyone. And I asked if people would you let me know how it went for them. And interestingly, I did receive feedback from people saying it was great to have a something in which to capture the gratitude and to be able to look back on it and reflect on it over the months. And then I had a couple people actually tell me they ended up using it for taking notes at meetings. And my first response was, well, that wasn't the purpose of the gratitude journal. And what they came back and said was, by having this journal, taking a moment and remembering what it was about was a wonderful way for them to become centered before they entered into a meeting, especially if it was going to be potentially confrontational. So these gratitude journals had a magic of their own that I had never anticipated.
It's marvelous.
So I would like to go back to talking about trust and purposeful legacies. As you know, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a coach. And whenever I talk to lawyers, I continue to butt heads with lawyers who have been trained and convinced that the traditional tax motivated and protectionist trust is not only the best, but the only way. So consequently, I began working with clients on the creation of what you and I define as a purposeful legacy. And there are several aspects or pieces to the creation of a formal purposeful legacy, including the creation of purposeful gifts, the ethical will, letter of wishes to the guardian or trustee, the legacy letter, also known as the family love letter or letter from heaven, to the parenting bucket list, and more. In your mind, are there really just three main pieces? Are there more to a purposeful legacy? And could you speak about what they are and what makes each of these documents distinct yet complementary?
It's a marvelous question, and I think what I'm discovering is purposeful legacies really come in all sorts of sizes and shapes and flavors. And the common thread of a purposeful legacy is that if it is a purposeful legacy, it really reflects the vision and the hopes and dreams and values of the person creating that purposeful legacy of whatever kind or type it is. So if we use the umbrella of purposeful legacy as an overarching description for efforts to create legacies separate and apart from wills and trusts and family investment entities or other vehicles that transfer financial capital of one shape or another, and we focus on the other dimensions outside of those legal documents, there are really three kind of primary subsets of purposeful legacies. The ethical will is perhaps the one that people have heard of the most. The ethical will comes out of the Jewish tradition that if you go back to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, each of those patriarchs and Israel left ethical wills to their son or their children. And I think it's the 49th chapter of Genesis is really a compendium of the ethical will that Jacob left to his 12 sons. And the ethical will in its modern form has become a way to express values and to leave kind of a moral mandate or expression of what I expect you to do. And it often is what I expect you to do for your family and what I expect you to do with the wealth that I'm leaving to you. So there are lots of great examples and books written about them, but sometimes they can become a little bit domineering and heavy. The next category of a purposeful legacy is what I call the family legacy letter or the family love letter. You called it a letter from heaven. It is really a beautiful way to capture the most positive reflections of a parent or grandparent. We have a couple of exercises that I know you're familiar with that we suggest through the Purposeful Planning Institute that people use to create this type of a purposeful legacy. The I won the child lottery is one, and there's another that's very similar for grandparents. It's called the I won the grandchildren sweepstakes. Those were inspired by Randy Pausch, the author of a book called The Last Lecture. He was a Carnegie Mellon computer scientist who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and knew he had just months to live, and was asked as an honor before he really received this medical prognosis. He was asked to deliver what they called at Carnegie Mellon the last lecture. It was the most popular professor on campus speaking to the graduating class and giving them his wisdom around how to lead a successful life. So he did deliver the last lecture on campus, but at the same time, he was inspired as a result of this kind of 3-month death sentence that he had received to accelerate that process and to focus not just on the graduates, but on his children. And so he wrote a book that became known as The Last Lecture that is full of wisdom that he captured for his children. And one of the chapters I love the most in The Last Lecture is a chapter entitled I Won the Child Lottery. And in about 7 or 8 pages, he explains why he felt he and his wife had won the child lottery. They had 3 children, the 2 sons and a daughter. The oldest was like 7 or 7.5, and the youngest was just maybe his daughter. I think she was 18 months or 2 years at the time. And he could see in each of them giftedness, uniqueness. He had great hopes and dreams for each of them. And that chapter was his way of capturing expressions of how they had touched him, of the things he had seen that just he would forever be proud of as a parent. And how meaningful will it be for his children when they can appreciate that, to be able to read that chapter and to have that personal expression. So that is the second type of a family legacy letter, family love letter. And the third general category for these purposeful legacies is what I will call the letter of wishes. Some people call it a letter of instructions. We also, in the Purposeful Planning Institute, refer to it as guidance and guidelines. And it is a way in which the benefactor, trust creator, parent, grandparent can express their hopes and their dreams and their wishes for what will happen with the gifts that they're making, whether it's by will or by trust, and what they expect of their trustees and kind of instructions. So there's lots of things that spring out of that can be part of a purposeful legacy. We have a operator's manual that you can help a client, Jenny, create around what they hope their trustee will understand about this marvelous machine, a trust that's been created. There's an owner's manual that schools beneficiaries and how to become a great beneficiary and what I hope you will accomplish. And then, as you said, there is a lot of stuff that we've developed for parents with young children, like special instructions for guardians. So we have one document we call the Guardian's Roadmap, and another document, exercise, call them documents, are really exercises that you as a coach help your clients create. And the other one that I have in mind is the parenting bucket list. So in addition to this roadmap of instructions that you can leave for a guardian, the bucket list is a way that a young parent could envision all the things that we hope to do for our children if we live to see them successfully launched in life. And you create this bucket list of things you want to do with them, places you want to go, events you want to celebrate with them, how you would perhaps anticipate taking advantage of learning experiences that you want to expose them to. You put that down in 2, 3, 4 pages of your parenting bucket list, and then you look at it from time to time as a parent and remind yourself of where we're going, what we're doing, and it really becomes a very useful tool to the parent to guide them in maximizing the parenting influence that they'll have. But the other advantage it offers in the event of an untimely death is that parenting bucket list becomes a huge benefit to the orphans and to their guardians, who can refer to that bucketing list and can realize, here are things that the deceased parent wanted to do as guardian. I'm now going to make this happen. May not be at quite the same time, but I'm going to make sure that we do this. And when we do it, that the child knows that this is what their parent wanted. So these are all forms of the ways in which purposeful legacies are created and expressed. And while people can do this on their own, I, I have to put a plug in here, Jenny, because I think that a coach, or I think you are a coach, but you're more than that. You're a consultant as well. And I think in your coaching and consulting capacity, you provide amazing vision and opportunities to kind of expose your clients to what the possibilities are for what they can do. And then you provide emotional energy and courage and persistence to make sure that they get the task finished. I know how many people I have given these exercises to that take them home with the best intention, and many do complete them, but I'd say as many don't. And if they had a coach, it would make all the difference in the world.
Thank you so much for saying that, and you are so right. And one of the things that I often hear from young parents or even older parents are that our children are young. It's too young. They're too young for us to even start thinking about any of these issues. And then I have another client, a couple other clients actually, where the parents died when they were young and they were not prepared. And now that the children are turning 18 and 19, and there's still nothing for them. So it's really, what I have found is that these type of discussions are a great introduction. It's a safe way to start talking about the future, especially when there's significant wealth involved in the family. And as you know, we don't talk about money. Nice people don't talk about money. So this is a great way to have that conversation begin. So let me just say that I suspect that once a family embarks on the creation of a purposeful legacy, they will then be much more open to speaking with their lawyers about enhancing and taking their trust documents to a new and enhanced level of purposefulness. I think in some ways, by going through this process of creating a legacy with intention, that they're almost armored to go speak with lawyers whose tendency is to try to keep things so much more traditional. What do you think?
I think that is a distinct possibility. I do believe that there is a segment of the attorney population that just doesn't get it and
Mm-hmm.
won't get it. But there is a larger segment that really wants to honor the intention and will work to try to find a way to accommodate a client. So let me just give some real quick advice here. If there is one thing that any lawyer should be willing to do, it would be to allow your clients, Jenny, to create a symbolic name for their trust documents. That power of name, that is such a simple but powerful way. So that's, and some of the other things may or may not, you may or may not get cooperation. But if you could create a statement of meaning and associate a symbolic name that ties into that statement of meaning, I think that small step, you cannot underestimate how powerful it is, because if at your death that trust springs into action and now those beneficiaries begin to get probably quarterly trust statements, they're going to receive an envelope, and it's going to have on the statement the purposeful symbolic name of the trust. That's probably in the lifetime of an adult beneficiary, somewhere between 200 and 300 opportunities to reconnect that beneficiary to perhaps the most heartfelt meaning of that gift and purposes for that trust. They will remember that statement of meaning. They can come back and easily read it. That's the part of a trust they'll return to. So yes, I do think you're working with clients, you can really help them get vision around, okay, what would we like to actually get into the trust and to change the way in which the trust feels, to create this opportunity for it to really become an emotionally positive event rather than a legal document that engenders resistance, resentment, and antagonism between the beneficiaries and the trustee. The trustees are just trying to carry out those legal expressions of purpose and intent, but this can really change the outcome because it changes the way the document feels and looks to the beneficiaries.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation with you today, John A. I was going to ask you for a last word of wisdom, or action item for our listeners, and that might have been it. But is there another piece of wisdom or a suggested action item that you would like to give everyone before we sign off?
You know, Jenny, you said something a couple of minutes ago that really struck me, and I would like to return to it briefly. You said it's something to the effect it's never too early, or it shouldn't be too early for us to begin thinking about this. And when you're talking with young parents, some of them resist thinking or talking about this. I do want to close with this story. I had a husband and wife I was working with. I sat down with them. The wife related to me this story. When she was 9 years old, her mother died. Her father had left the home before her first birthday. She never had any contact with her father as an adult whatsoever. Her mother, before her 9th birthday, was diagnosed with cancer and ends up losing that battle. On her 16th birthday, she was going in the worst possible direction. She was being raised by her mother's mother, her grandmother, who was trying to get her to be a better student. She had started smoking. She was associating with the wrong crowd, and truthfully, she admitted to me she was plotting with some of her friends, running away. She was going to escape and run away from her grandmother's, hard fist. She felt she was just being domineered by her grandmother. And on that morning of her 16th birthday, the grandmother walked in and gave her an envelope. And she immediately recognized it was her mother's handwriting, and it was her name her mother had handwritten on the envelope. And the grandmother said, "Your mother asked me to deliver this to you on your 16th birthday." And then the grandmother stood there waiting for her to open. She refused. And finally, the grandmother got the idea. She's not going to open it while you're here, and walked out. And she then closed the door and opened. And I don't remember the exact words, but the letter went something like this: Dear Susan, I've asked your grandmother to deliver this to you on your 16th birthday. How I wish I could be there to see you blow out the candles on the cake tonight. And I also want you to know about all the things that I dreamed that I would be able to do with you, like be there for your high school graduation, take you to college, get you moved into your first college dorm, be there when you graduated from college, giving you away when you got married, helping you move into your first home, being there when you had your first baby, and helping you bring that child home from the hospital. And she went on to then describe other things that she, the mother, had hoped and dreamed she would do with this daughter. And then she closed with just a very powerful, how much she loved her daughter and how meaningful it had been to her to be her mother. That letter suddenly transformed the life of now the 16-year-old angry orphan who suddenly had a reason to be the person her mother had dreamed of. And I just want to say to the young parents that might be listening to this call, or that you might have an opportunity to coach and help, that if you do nothing else but have Jenny help you create what I call the 9-year-old orphan letter, that family legacy letter that will be preserved and given to your child if, heaven forbid, something happens to you, that, think of the power that had for this 16-year-old. As she admitted to me, she said, I changed my life completely. I went from flunking out to getting A's. I got a scholarship, went to a college I was excited to go to. I met my husband. We had our 2 children. Everything my mother dreamed about, I ended up accomplishing. But I'm totally convinced if my mother hadn't written that letter and had my grandmother give it to me, none of those things would have happened. So that's the power, and it is never, never too early to get started on a purposeful legacy.
Wow, powerful. I have to tell you, I was getting choked up and teary-eyed listening to you, John A. I have a picture of my mom and dad actually right in front of me here in my office. While you were reading that, I thought, and this picture of my mother is of my mother as a young mother, a very, very young woman when she and my dad were madly in love and starting their family. And I can just imagine all of those dreams that she had for me and for my siblings. So thank you again. You are so wise and such a champion for families of wealth, and for all of us committed to supporting individuals and families and creating a fulfilling and healthy relationship with their heirs, while at the same time ensuring a healthy transition of wealth from generation to generation. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hopefully you will come back again in the future.
I would love to. And so well spoken what you just said. Thank you.
Thank you, John A. again. And for all of our listeners, I look forward to being with you again during our next podcast. Until then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. For more information on this podcast, or guidance for having more meaningful conversations around inherited or sudden wealth, please visit our website at dynamicsoffamilywealth.com.